Hello, everybody. This is Professor Parish, and we are going to talk today about MLA, which is probably something that you dread in a college class because citing citations and including resources, it's hard. It can be very difficult to compile and put together, but it is extremely important, and we're going to talk about that today. So this presentation is going to go over the most up-to-date MLA, how to cite, and also do in-text citations, and to help you with your research moving forward in papers 2, 3, and 4. So mainly the reason why you want to pick credible sources obviously is to back yourself up with resources that can be reliable. So when you pick credible sources, you obviously want them to be unbiased. You can either do facts or a personal testimony, and the big thing is you want them to be timely, typically coming out within the last 5 years, unless you're doing some background information, and those sources can obviously be older. So with bias, the big thing is that I would argue nearly every source we encounter anymore has some bias to it. The trick is making sure you're transparent for your audience, to make sure your audience understands that if there is a bias with a source, that you recognize it and that they understand it too. And because even if a source has a little bit of bias, there can be value in it. And so you can't discredit it just because of that. So for example, if I had a source that I knew was biased, I would just acknowledge it, like in this bottom paragraph. I would say, although Jernigan's writing has been labeled highly conservative by the New York Times, I feel he still makes a valid point about immigration reform and ones that needs to be explored further. You could say something like that, and you'll note here that I've got my little nytimes.com. This is what we call an in-text citation. So anytime that you reference a direct quote from a source, you need to include at the end this in-text citation so your reader knows where did you get that information from. With cite credibility, this is my big stickler, and this will really come into play with your final paper in the class. Don't use Wikipedia. I tell this story every semester, but I had a friend in college that was one of my classmates. He went to Wikipedia as a joke, and he got on Frank Sinatra's Wikipedia page. He's a singer, if you don't know Frank Sinatra, and he put down in Frank Sinatra's Wikipedia page that he was his spiritual advisor and that he actually read his eulogy, which is a lie. Now, Wikipedia eventually caught on to this and corrected that, so if you go on there now, it won't say that. However, by the time Wikipedia corrected this error, other sources and other people had already cited that Wikipedia page. So you can actually go online, look up Jairus Bellamy, Frank Sinatra, and you'll find some people actually citing that he is Frank Sinatra's spiritual advisor, which is a lie. So because of that, sites like Wikipedia, ask.com, WikiHow, about.com, you just want to avoid them because they can be edited and they aren't technically considered credible. So the best way to determine if your site is credible is looking at what we call the domain name, which is that .com or .org at the end. If it's a .com or .net site, just be careful because these are commercial sources, so anyone can purchase a web domain and publish whatever they want on them with a .com or a .net domain. So you just have to be careful. Obviously, they're cheap, so some hospitals or medical sites will use .coms, and those are obviously credible, so just use your best judgment on those. The same goes with an organization or a .org site. Organizations, they can be credible. They also cannot. There are Bigfoot anonymous organizations that I clearly wouldn't consider credible. You, again, just use your best judgment. And then the last two, .edu and .gov, I would not question you on the credibility of those sites because if it's a government site, it clearly has to be fact-checked and checked for its credibility. And if it's an education site, it's the same thing. Your college isn't going to put something ridiculous online. They're going to make sure everything is vetted and properly researched. So that's pretty much, as far as credibility goes, a good guide to kind of measure the types of sites you're looking at. And then obviously you can ask these questions about credibility. These are on our MLA citation presentation. I'm not going to go through them all because I want to start talking about MLA, but you can ask yourself these questions if you're concerned whether or not your source is biased or credible. And then facts and testimonies, you can use both of these types of research in your papers. just kind of knowing the difference between them. Obviously, testimonies are subjective, so you want to make sure you're transparent about this to your audience. And then finally, Kairos, which if you're in English 121, you've heard of ethos, pathos, and logos, which is your logic, emotions, and credibility. Kairos is timeliness. So again, as much as our digital age changes and updates, trying to get sources that are newer than 5 years is ideal, but unless it's like background information, which can obviously be older. Okay, so now that we've run through that, let's talk about MLA. MLA stands for the Modern Language Association. It's basically an organization that was designed to help give people credit where credit is due. Because if you've ever written a research paper before, you all know the time and effort that goes into that. Imagine someone writing hundreds of pages. And then obviously if somebody's going to reference that, they want credit for you referencing their hard work. So that's kind of what the idea behind this is. Originally, we just cited books, and so everything was easy. But as we've gone on, we are citing more and more things. So the more things we're able to cite, the more complicated MLA becomes. However, there's a pretty basic formula. There's only two ways that you use MLA in your papers. One is when you're actually referencing within the essay, and that's called the in-text citation. And we saw an example of that with the NY Times article earlier. And then the other is the works cited page. This is called a reference page, a bibliography, sources. I mean, I've seen it being labeled a number of different things, but it's a works cited page where you list your source in full. The in-text citation is just the little tiny reference to it. So let's talk about in-text citations first. In-text citations, they're just bits of information in parentheses that you put after the sentence. So example here I have, Professor Billingsley stated the importance of, quote, completing all tasks of the project on time, end quote. Whenever I use that direct citation, I need to reference it with an in-text citation. So I've put illstu.edu here, which is Illinois State's webpage. And so obviously we're assuming the professor is from, the source is from that site. The good news about in-text citations, people sometimes think that they're really hard or confusing. They're not. You really only have two options. You have print sources and web sources. So you either have tangible physical documents or you have documents you found online. So those are the only two types of documents you're dealing with. And with in-text citations, you just pick which type of document you're using, and then you just kind of follow this formula. So with a print source, you have a couple of options. If your source has an author, but you don't state it in the essay itself, you would put their last name and the page number as the in-text citation. So for example, if I said, the article noted, pandas are the cutest animals. I've got my quotation here, so my in-text, I don't mention the author anywhere in this sentence. So I'm going to put Billingsley, the author's last name, and the page number that I found it on. That's it. That's the in-text. That's all you needed. Now, if that same source didn't have an author, or I stated the author in the sentence, then what I would do is put the title of the book or text and the page number. So if I said, Billingsley pointed out, pandas are the cutest animals. Note, I've put the author's name here, so I don't want to put the author's name again. Instead, what I'll do is put the book title, which in this case is Cute 101, and the page number. And that's it. If you have a print source, those are your two options. That's what you have to choose from. It's pretty easy. Now, if I have a digital source, which I am going to guess most of your sources are going to be digital because that's just the day and age we research, then you only have two options as well. If you have an author that is not stated in the text, you put their last name only. Digital sources don't have page numbers. It's kind of a pet peeve of mine if people put like a page number with an online source because web pages don't have actual physical pages to look at. They're just links. So in this case, if I said, there's no way to beat a Rubik's Cube in under 4 seconds. Note, the author's name is not listed anywhere, so I just put Billingsley at the end. That's it. It's all you need for the in-text citation. Now, if your source does not have an author, or if you put their name in the actual text, then all you do is put the basic part of the web address. You don't have to do www, nothing afterwards, no backslashes, none of that other garbage. just the basic part of the web address. So if my essay says Billingsley stated, the Rubik's Cube is hard to beat, I've said the author's name here, so I'm just going to put the basic website at the end for my in-text citation, which is just nytimes.com. And that's it. So that's your only options for digital sources. So in-text citations are not hard. You just have to figure out what type of source are you using, and did you mention the author's name in the text or not. Now, I will say that if you are citing the same source multiple times in the same paragraph, just put this in-text citation at the very end of the paragraph. Because if you have Billingsley in parentheses all over your paragraph, it's going to look weird. So just save this for the very end of the paragraph and just have it there so that I know that you've gotten your research from the same source in that paragraph. Okay, so now on to a works cited page. With a works cited page, what you do is it has to be on a separate page. Don't start your works cited page at the end of your essay on the same page. Just create a new page and start fresh. At the top, you're going to center works cited as the title. Now, all of your sources should be in alphabetical order based on whatever the first letter of the citation is, whether it's the author's name, whether it's the title of the text, whatever. Your works cited should be in alphabetical order. So I have a lot of students ask the question, how do I know if I should italicize or use quotation marks with titles? And so I've made this little slide here to help give you an idea. So hopefully you can reference back to this slide on the presentation when you're doing your works cited page. My rule of thumb is if it's a large text, it's in italics. If it's a small text, it's in quotation marks. So if you're citing the entire book, novel, or memoir, you're going to put that title in italics. If you're citing a chapter of a book or a short story, it's going to be in quotation marks. If you're citing an entire television show, it's in italics. If you're citing an episode only, it's in quotation marks. If you're citing an entire website like New York Times or the American Psychological Association, then those titles are in italics. But if you're just citing a poem or a song or a specific article in that journal, then it's going to be in quotation marks. And then music albums, those are in italics. Just the songs are in quotation marks, and just the webpage title are quotation marks. So think if it's big, italicize. If it's small, use quotation marks. And you can always reference back to this if you need to double check your work. All right, so here's the basics. When we started out with MLA, we only were citing books. And so we developed this formula on how to give credit to authors and their work. And from there, this formula has branched out, it's evolved, it's changed, but the basics are still there. So if you are citing a book, you're going to do the author's last name, comma, their first name, then a period, the title of the work, the publisher, and the date. That's it. So with a book, author last name, first name, book title, like we just talked about. If it's a book, it's going to be in italics. The city of publication, the publisher, and the year. That's it. So my example down here is Smith, comma, John. So John Smith's my author. A Day to Remember is the title in italics. Boston's where it's published. Penguin Press is the publisher. It's published in 2012. That's all I need. I can use all of this information right here to find that source. And that's really the idea. The idea is that if I, your reader, want to go on and research more and read more from your sources, I can use your works cited page to find those and research them further. Web pages, which I assume are what most of you are going to be using for your citations, web pages are very similar. You have your author's last name, a comma, their first name, the title of the web page in quotation marks. Then here's where a lot of people get confused. Your web URL, which is your basic website, is in italics. Then you have the publisher of that website, the date published, the medium, and a link to it. Now, here's where it gets confusing. A lot of people wonder, well, why do I have to list the web URL and the publisher? Aren't they the same thing? With most websites, they're going to be pretty similar. Because a website, if you think of marketing from a marketing standpoint, a website wants their publisher and their web page to be very similar, so it's easy for customers to find. So look at my example down here. I have Tanya Murphy, so I have Murphy, Tanya. Her article is called Immigration Reform on the Forefront, so I have the title of the article in quotation marks. My basic web URL is NY Times. You can put .com if you want, but I just shortened it to NY Times because I thought that was short enough. Now, notice NY Times is my web URL. My publisher, though, is the New York Times Online. So it's a little bit more written out. It's a little bit different. Now, if your article does not have a date published, what you would do is you would put n.d. for no date. That's what you'll put if you can't find a date for your article or your source, n.d. Then I put web, which is the medium, and then here's my link. And as you can see, it's got the little hand pop up. I can click on that link and go straight to the article. That is a web page MLA citation. I'm going to imagine that most of your citations are going to be in this format. So please make sure you reference back to this formula and this example to kind of help you walk through that. Now, with dates, we write dates out day, month, and then year. So it's kind of like military time. So for September 24th, 2014, we do 24 Sept 2014 or 14 May 2414. If your month has more than 4 letters, you abbreviate it. So like May, June, and July, I don't have to abbreviate those months because they're just 4 or less letters. But for any other month, I'm going to need to abbreviate it. All right. And then, like I said in the previous slide, with that main part of the URL, don't put the www, just put NY Times or nytimes.com. Now, I would argue that of all the things to cite, journal articles are probably the hardest because journal articles have more information to cite. So I wanted to create the slide to show you all how to cite a journal article. So what you'll want to do is take your author's last name, first name, like we've been doing, do the article title in quotation marks. Then the journal is going to be in italics because that's your big text. Then here's where it gets a little bit different. You have your volume, a period, the issue, and then in parentheses, you're going to put the year or date it was published. Then you're going to put a colon and the pages of that article. And finally, you're going to show a link where you found it. So here's my example. I have Jane Doe, so I have my author, Doe, Jane. I have the article title, Pavlov's Theory, in quotation marks. I have my journal title in italics, American Psychological Journal. Then you can see here I have my volume and my issue. So 14 is my volume, period, 5 is my issue. I have the year published, which is 2014. Then I have a colon and my pages, 34 to 56. And then finally, where I found this source at was ebscohost.com. So I have my link here. So it's not hard to cite a journal. There's just a little bit of different formatting. So just kind of be sure to reference this if you end up using any journal articles for your citations. As always, if you want to find more information out, you can visit Purdue Owl's website, which I've got a link here. Purdue University in Indiana, their English department runs this online resource. It's extremely helpful. They have so many different examples and ways that you can use MLA listed. So make sure to check it out. But also look at your handbook. If you have your Cengage handbook, there is an MLA section and it is up to date. There is a card that comes in that MLA handbook. If you kept it from English 121, it's up to date too. So be sure to reference that as well. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask and let me know. So I hope that this presentation was a little bit helpful going through MLA. As always, if you have any questions, just be sure to ask or let me know. But otherwise, hopefully this will be a good resource for you to reference, especially when we get into our final paper in the class. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll have week 3 or week 4, actually. I'll have next week's lecture video posted soon. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you all again soon. Bye.